Slavic calendar part second and last. Translation of Fragments of Spiritual Culture of the Slavs by Kazimierz Moszyński. For clarity, now archaic Little Russia is translated as Ukraine and Great Russia as Russia. Project Vidya is all about preserving culture, tradition, language with no judgment and no bias. This is why in translation I kept the original, nowadays considered politically incorrect vocabulary, for example uncivilized, exotic, to preserve not only the knowledge but also the point of view of Kazimierz Moszyński. Translation pages 145 to 151. Vladimir Matlakovsky devoted one of the chapters of his beautiful and valuable book, which title translates into English as Decorations and Equipment of the Polish People in Podhale, to the processing of flax into linen. Here is the picture he paints at the beginning. It is a great, cheerful October in Polish Październik day. The shed is wide open, and a dozen or so invited and hired girls are diligently scutching flax. And verse after verse flows, accompanied by the special sound of beech flails and the crackling of crushed flax herds in Polish Październik. Rays of sunlight pierce the open field, and in their glow, the dark silhouettes of the girls flicker in a golden cloud of dust and crumbs of crushed straw. Throughout the Slavic world, from the Bohemian forest to the ends of Siberia, the beginning or middle of autumn is the season of scutching flax, and the clatter of flails and the Październik flax herds, strewn courtyards, barns, and even streets are the most characteristic features of this period. The name of the month, Październik, with a scope similar to that of the name Versin, seems quite clear in this light and can be translated simply as the month of flax herds, compared to Bulgarian Pazdar, flax herds, Serbian-Croatian Pozdar, Pozdarka, flax herds, Slovenian Pazdar, Pazdari, flax herds, Czech Pazdar, Polish Pazdir, etc. However, there is a dark spot against this clarity. The ancient Russians understood the word Październik to mean not only the 10th month, but also a cold north wind that strips the leaves from the trees, and even today in the far north of Russia, Październik is the northeasterly wind, especially in autumn, which is the coldest. Admittedly, there are very simple explanations for this. First, the similarity between the names of the month and the wind may be coincidental, or second, the name of the month may have taken on the meaning of the name of the wind in Rus due to the common word październik, to strip, to tear off in Polish paździerats, and because it referred to the autumn period when the winds indeed strip the leaves from the trees. Be that as it may, contrary to both of these very plausible explanations, one might suspect that, quite the opposite of the second explanation, the original understanding of the monthly name Październik was not the moon stripping leaves from trees, and that its association with Październik, flax herds, occurred later and by chance. If we were to accept the latter explanation, then the next name we have to deal with here, listopat, literally, falling of leaves, also a Polish name of the month November, strictly speaking, would be a duplicate of the previous one. This name is quite clear as a term or name for the autumn month, not only widely used among the Slavs, but also having had exact equivalents in ancient Greece, Ireland, southern Germany, among the Balts, eastern Finns, and the indigenous peoples of northern Asia and North America. As mentioned above, Montenegrins use the word November to refer to the period when leaves fall from trees in general. Similarly, Russians call the entire season of leaf fall, that is, for them, September and October, November. They used a similar word in the past as the name of the 11th month, but they borrowed or brought this meaning from somewhere in the south or southwest. The name Grudin, literally, the moon that causes clods, hardness of the earth, is also widely used, but its meanings vary greatly. Apart from Grudin, there is another, less common name for the 11th, 12th, and 1st month, Studin, literally cool, cold, or Studin. This term, like the previous one, is old and attested in the form Studeny in a 12th century Russian, South Russian monument with the meaning December. It probably came to Russia from the Balkans. The next name, Proseniets, is the only one of those listed whose etymology is quite unclear, but most likely it means the month that clears up, in other words, as our villager would say, the month when the days get longer. It's already clearing up on the holiday, compared to the words prosieti, sinati, to shine, to light up. The month during which the days become longer. It is already clearing up on the feast day, compared to the words prosieti, sinati, to shine, to light up, to flash, to sparkle. In favor of this interpretation, which has long been put forward in a similar form and shared by many, is the fact that people pay a lot of attention to the increase in light after the winter solstice. In this context, it is also worth recalling the probable kinship of both Slavic names for spring with words meaning brightness, compared to also the Serbo-Croatian expression leto sine pa I mine, meaning summer will flash and pass. Among Slavic peasants in the Balkans and the Eastern Carpathians, another name is still very popular today, Sitsin. Apart from the distorted forms of this term, its etymology is quite clear, and its meaning is still quite vivid in some places, for example in Slovenia. It is a name which, if we were to create it today in Poland, would sound like Rombian, a month moon of cutting. It refers to the period of tree felling and was derived from the ancient Slavic verb sekti, to cut, to chop. The once very common use of this word in the sense of chopping is evidenced by numerous ozika Old Polish. A defensive fortification made of accumulated chopped cut trees, pasika beehive, originally placed in an area where the forest was cut, zasiki as ozika, etc. As is well known, peasants usually chop wood in winter after the sleigh road has been established, for the following reasons. Firstly, during this period of time they are freer from other daily farm chores. Secondly, sleigh transport facilitates transportation, especially since primitive sleighs are incomparably stronger than carts and can withstand much heavier loads. And finally, thirdly, the greater compactness, elasticity, and strength of trees felled in winter is also a factor of some importance. In Poland and Ukraine, the sleigh route is usually established in January, much less frequently at the end or in the second half of December. The proper time for cutting down forests is therefore January and February. For the name Sitchin in the sense we have given here, we find an analogy in the old South German name for the second month Halsmonat, about which Ebner writes that it came from here, because around this time people work in the forests. Contrary to everything said above, when translating the name Sitchin, one could also refer to the following details. The Hutzels derive it, Ukrainian Sichin, from the fact that the month that bears it cuts with snow or cuts with wind and frost. Montenegrins, as we have already mentioned, call the last days of the second and the first days of the third month, when the worst weather occurs, Sic, and this word, used in a broader sense, is also understood as bad weather. Finally, Croatians from Otok describe a harsh winter as Basi Sichin Zima, even if it is the second month. Despite the fact that Sichin commonly refers to the first month. In our country Poland, there is also the word Sikavica, used to describe driving rain or hail with wind. It is also common to talk about rain with wind, and even about the cold cutting wind itself, that it cuts the face, etc. However, it is very doubtful that this was the meaning of the word sekti that the ancient Slavs had in mind when they created the name Sichin. On the contrary, it is more likely that it was against the background of this already existing name that versions such as the Hutzel one arose, proclaiming that January took its name from the fact that it cuts with snow. This would be yet another example of so-called folk etymology. The first signs of spring were given a name by the Slavs derived from the name of the birch tree, or rather, the first month of spring was given this name Berzian. It may seem rather strange why the birch tree was used as a starting point in this case, but in part one of this work, part one of folk culture of the Slavs, not this translation, on page 13, we read. Throughout Russia, as well as in some parts of Poland, the Czech Republic, Yugoslavia, and Bulgaria, birch sap and less commonly, maple sap are used. By cutting the bark of these trees in early spring, sap is extracted and consumed raw or used in various dishes. The fact that this is a phenomenon that is very important to peasants and characterizes the first weeks of spring in their eyes is best attested to by Osipovits, according to whom the Masurians of Augustuve in early spring, in other words, the time when Oskoa birch sap comes out of the trees, directly called it Oskoa. Moreover, Milisvik found a manuscript in one of the Serbian monasteries in which the fourth month was simply referred to as Bryzosok, that is Bryzosok, where the first part of the compound undoubtedly derives from the word berza, birch, and the second part certainly means sap in this case. It is also worth noting that when one of my students wrote down all the old local names of the months, given to him in 1930 by an 81-year-old Russin from the village of Esniwu, Swaksuf County, and not finding Berzian among them, asked the old man whether he knew the word Berzian. He was immediately answered. Berzian, it's like Baraza Puske Sik, we means birch let sap. There was a name like that. Let us add that in Belarus, in the village of Bershtai Grodno district, the old name of a month Sakovic, whose meaning, however, was not given, is used further in the villages of Prokopowitsi, same district, in Yatvij Baranowitsi district. Sakevik, fourth month, was encountered, and in the village of Dvortsi Prajana district, Satsan, third month. All these terms are obviously derived from sap Oskwa. Also among the Lithuanians, who are neighbors of the Belarusians, the fourth month is called Sultekis, literally sap flowing, and among the Latvians Sulumanis, sap month. The name taken from Oskwa also exists among the Estonians. Finally, among the Votes, the fourth month is called the month of birches, because they also collect sap from birches during this month. Much more important than the sap flow in birch trees, a phenomenon accompanying spring, is the growth of grass for peasants, as it allows them to drive their cattle out to fresh pasture. The importance of the growth of grass in spring in the lives of cattle-breeding peoples is demonstrated by the fact that they sometimes consider it to be the beginning of the season. We see this, for example, in some areas of Serbo-Croatia, and in the past, when the hay economy among the Slavs was at the stage of development it is today in the remote corners of Russia, and fresh fodder for cattle was awaited in the villages with real anxiety or longing. It could probably be seen in other parts of Slavic territory, if not throughout its entire area. The Slavic name for the month Travany, used for the spring months, is perhaps the most easily explained of all in terms of its origin. It is still used today by Bulgarian, Serbian, Croatian, Slovenian, and other peasant communities, while non-Slavic equivalents can be found both in Europe and in Northern Asia. Even more widespread among the Slavs than the previous one, although less popular among peasants, is the name Kwiecień in Polish. Kwiecień meaning the month of April, referring to spring flowers, which appear in increasing numbers from March onwards. Similar terms are also used by the Germans, Dutch, etc., and also by the Latvians, Latvian Ziedimanis, sixth month, Zieds meaning flower. Among the Old Slavic names, we could also mention a few derived from the word suk, dry, and denoting the third month, as well as the name Izak, derived by etymologists from the name of the locust of the same sound. Observing the variations in the meanings of individual month names, we can easily see that some of them were caused by climatic differences between southern and northern Slavic regions. With the exception of the name Studin or Studin, which is rare in the north and probably came from the south, and Grudin, which has a strangely divergent meaning, I know of only one case where the same name definitely means different months in the south than in the north, contrary to climatic differences. However, I know of several cases where this is in accordance with them. Thus, Travany is the sixth or fifth month in the north, and the fifth or fourth in the south, although even in the south, grasses often fail in the fourth month, hence its Bulgarian name Elzitreva. Chervan for the northern Slavs denotes the seventh or sixth month, for the southern Slavs the sixth or fifth, Lipin for the northern Slavs the seventh, for the southern Slavs the sixth, finally, Sierpin for the former the eighth, for the latter the seventh. It is striking that this shift in meaning, occurring between the north and south of the Slavic world, concerns a series of three names neighboring each other in order and a fourth Travany, which either neighbors them or is separated from them by only one name, Kwiecień. Most likely, therefore, the changes in the original meaning of the names took place here within the South Slavic, or perhaps North Slavic series, not separately for each name, but in one connection or another. Based on many different clues, some of which are included in the above overview, but some of which are so minor or require such detailed consideration that I must omit them here due to lack of space, it would be possible to reconstruct the former order of the month names known to us as follows. The beginning of the year was most likely marked by the month of Berzian, falling somewhere between the third and fourth month of today's calendar and referring to the sap flow in birch trees. It was followed by Kwiecień and Travany, corresponding to today's fourth, sixth months of today's calendar. These were certainly followed by Chervin, which may have been called Izak in certain areas of Slavic culture for a very long time, followed by Lipin and then Sierpin or Zariv and Versin or Ryan. Whether the names Pazdianik and Listopat meant 2 consecutive moons from the beginning of their existence, or whether they originally constituted a similar pair of alternative terms such as Versin and Ryan, is difficult to say without detailed study. The same applies to the mutual relationship between the names Grudin and Studin. The year ended with Proseniets and Sitchin. If we were to reject both Pazdianik and Studin as possibly synonymous with the names Listopat and Grudin, we would end up with 12 different names for the months. However, if we were to reject only one of them, there would obviously be 13 such names left. Naturally, the above reconstruction, as somewhat ideal, applies at best only to some unknown parts of the former Slavic world, and by no means to the whole. In addition to the names that have survived in the mouths of the people and in written monuments, there may have been, and certainly were, other more or less local names that our reconstruction does not take into account.